Society is in the early 60s. He's occupied just about every level that you can, aside from answering telephones. He doesn't do that, or he doesn't do any typing. But other than that, he's held just about every position at the Thompson Society, from field coordinator, and for several years, he left the staff, ran a successful company, and as he was traveling, well, the globe really, traveled Europe, and also all across the United States, he found some time to stop in the libraries and do a lot of research. And he compiled a lot of his research into what has become my favorite book, To the Victor Go the Myths and Monuments, which is a 400-page plus tome of a history of how the corruption has been trying, or sorry, the conspiracy has been trying to corrupt our government since its inception in 1776. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Art Thompson, author, former CEO of the Thompson Society.
Am I going to speak into this, or is this going to be whatever?
Go ahead, whatever you want.
Okay, whatever I want. Okay, good night.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about George Soros a little bit this evening. It's based on my book, The World of Soros, which is the latest book that has been published. There's a couple more coming out real soon. The next one's on property rights. I think you'll all find that one very interesting. And it should be out, depending on the paper shortage, in the next month or two. Then after that, I've got one on American exceptionalism. A lot of people think that when you're talking about American exceptionalism, you're talking about the people, but that's not true. The people come from all over the world, don't they, into the United States. So we're no different than anybody else. American exceptionalism is the system. The system that we have is so different from all the rest of the world that most people, it's right in front of their face, but they've never been taught how exceptional things are that made America so great and so powerful, the greatest country on the earth in the history of man. Just give you a couple of examples. Name me one other country that declares that we get our rights from God. Name me one other country that has local police that's not controlled by the national government. And you can go on and on and on with things like that that are so different, that gave us a system of keeping liberty. And you know how we got our liberty? According to John Adams, we got our liberty because there were enough people in the late 1700s that organized to educate their neighbors. They were called the Committees of Correspondence. And later on, he wrote a letter, and he said, what do you mean about the American Revolution? Are you talking about the American War? He says the revolution occurred before the war, and it was in the minds and hearts of the American people. You know, a lot of people don't think about, well, wait a minute, what gave the conviction and the courage for those militia to stand up on the Lexington Green to the British troops? That in their heart they knew what they were doing was right. Why did they know that? How many people in your neighborhood would do that today? Why? Because they're ignorant. I'm not saying they're stupid, okay? They're ignorant. And you know, you talk to them all the time. And can't you understand? You know, you get frustrated with it sometimes. So we have to get the fundamentals of Americanism out there. So we have to show them what the solution is. And they're in the fundamentals. They're in the Declaration. They're in the Constitution. But you can't teach these things any longer in schools because of one reason. Well, actually two. One is because of the law, and the other is because people don't understand organization and what's happened to our schools. If the Declaration says that we get our rights with God, that's what a lot of us, probably everybody in the audience knows that. Second paragraph of the Declaration. What about the first paragraph? What does that say? It basically says that God demands that we have independence and we're going to fight for it. It's our responsibility under God to do this. And that's a portion a lot of people don't pay any attention to. So if you can't teach that God even exists in the schoolrooms today because of Supreme Court orders, how do you teach the Declaration of Independence? You can't. So you find it being ignored more and more and more in the schools. It's a serious problem. And it's the same with the Constitution. In my book, In the Shadows of the Deep State, I show that both major teachers' unions are socialist entities tied to the United Nations, completely under the control of the UN. And they're the ones that are deciding what is going to be taught to your kids. So when you start looking into the textbooks like I have, even back when I was in school in the 50s, okay? In the early 50s, I had civics. And I was taught there's no difference between a republic and a democracy. You can use whatever word you wanted to use. They both meant the same thing, which is not true. The Constitution of the United States mandates that every state have a republican system of government, a republic. You can't find the word democracy in the Constitution or any state constitution. But you can find an awful lot about democracy in the words of the founders of the United States who were afraid of it and did not want democracy, period, under any circumstances. It was to be a republic of laws, not majority rule that could be manipulated. So the thing is that the people are not studying our system. In 1970, I was shown a civics book in the state of Idaho that was in the middle school. Now, the state of Idaho has a conservative image, doesn't it? Well, maybe. But the Second Amendment, and I'm quoting it exactly here, this is the Second Amendment according to this text, teaching the kids. The people have the right to own guns, but Congress has the right to regulate them. That's a lot different from what it actually says, isn't it? So all those students are being set up with the idea that Congress can come in and regulate gun ownership, you see. That's what's going on in our schools. It has been for a long, long time. A lot longer than people realize. But at any rate, the subject tonight is the influence of George Soros on our political world, if you will. And George Soros, keep in mind, is only one guy. He is one person. And people have a tendency, particularly conservatives, to look at leaders as being the prominent individual instead of the organization that they're a part of. A lot of times because they can't even see that organization. Okay? Soros is only a part of a large organization that is out to turn this country into a Marxist government. And when he dies, he's 93 by the way, when he dies, guess what? His sons or somebody else. Remember back, us old guys, we remember we used to say, if we just get rid of that David Rockefeller, everything would be great. Well, he died. What happened? Nothing. It just kept going on the way it had been before, because David Rockefeller admitted in his autobiography, memoirs, I think it was page 403 or 4 or something like that. He says, people accuse me of being part of a cabal, that's the word he used, conspiracy, to bring about a one world government. And if that's what they accuse me of, I plead guilty. And he admitted what we've been trying to tell people for many, many years. But when he died, nothing changed. It just kept going on. Now, in my book on Soros, I don't say anything in the book I can't prove. There are a lot of rumors that are out there circulating about Soros. And if I couldn't actually nail them down, I didn't put them in the book. Because the reality of what he has admitted and what I can prove is bad enough. So let's take a look at some of these things. We are literally dealing with a world of corruption. And this corruption is linked to a conspiracy to bring about a condition where Americans are only a cog in the wheel of what they call their new world order. Now, for those of you who are history buffs, you can trace the term New World Order back to a book written 3 years before the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, called The Holy Family. And in that book, Karl Marx and Engels said that the phrase New World Order is a communist slogan. Now think about that for a minute. Of all the people subsequently who have used that particular phraseology, and if you look at the individuals who have used that phraseology, it's no surprise that they have used it. It's just that sometimes it is so fantastic, it's difficult to believe that they believe in what we call Marxism. But at any rate, there are several layers of conspiracy and, of corruption. There is the good old boy type of corruption that may not be of individuals who want to aggrandize their bank account and that sort of thing. They just want to stay in power. And they don't want any newcomers coming along and rocking the boat. So that's a level of corruption. Then another level of corruption is those individuals that want to make themselves rich and do everything they can to do so, and they use the power of government to do it. And then there's a third level of corruption that literally want to bring about power. They lust after power. And that is a real serious problem that we have in the United States today. And I think we see all those levels of corruption being used to the detriment of the liberty of the United States people. This may come as a surprise to you, but the majority of Republicans believe the election in 2020 was corrupted. Actually, about 87%, I think, of the Republicans believe that the 2020 elections were corrupted. Surprisingly, a substantial number of Democrats believe so too, about 17%. And then a majority of independents think so as well. But what happened to all this corruption? What happened when people started to complain? What happened when they went to issue court cases and everything else in relationship to this thing? They couldn't get anywhere. How many millions, for instance, were raised by the Republican Party to do something about the 2020 election? What did they do? Can you bring your thumb and forefinger together? It's a real serious problem. Now, my life outside of the John Birch Society, when I've been on staff, I can't get involved in politics, okay? But off staff of the John Birch Society, I've always been very active in the Republican Party. I've been everything from a precinct committeeman up to a state committeeman. And I've been on county platform committees up to state platform committees. I've been on an electorate twice for the Republican, for president. I haven't actually voted because every time I was elected an elector, the Republican lost, so I never actually got to vote. But I got the position, and so on and so forth. That has been my political activity. And I can tell you that my experience in the Republican Party is where I spent half my time fighting Republicans.
Yes.
Because they weren't constitutionalists. And I can't tell you how many would lie to my face and then turn around and then stab you in the back. And for those of you who are very interested in the Republican Party, you should get my book called To the Victor Go the Myths and Monuments, because I document in there who actually started the Republican Party. Now, for years, I've tried to find out who started the Republican Party. Well, it was started in Ripon, Wisconsin. And it's actually pronounced Ripon there. Everybody else pronounces it Ripon, but it isn't. It's drop the old, it's Ripon. And so, everywhere I looked, every book I picked up, every library I went in, it started in Ripon, Wisconsin. What else do you need to know? So finally, I decided I'm going to go to Ripon, Wisconsin. And the town is quite open about it. But a lot of people, they don't pick this literature up and so on and so forth. And I went to the little white schoolhouse where the thing was started, and it's a little, I think it's about half the size of this room. And I walked in, I started to laugh. And the curator of the museum says, "What are you laughing for?" Well, I didn't tell her. I just answered her this way. I said, "I've been trying to find out for years who started the party, and here it is right here in the museum." Well, what I didn't tell her was that these were the most radical leaders in the United States at that time. Because I knew who they were, because of my study in putting this book together. I studied who all these people were. But the average citizen walking into that museum wouldn't have a clue, because they wouldn't know who these people were. Just names don't mean anything. So the history of the Republican Party is not what people think it is. And by the way, the reason there's the title of the book says "To the Victor Go the Myths and Monuments," one of the myths is Lincoln did not start the Republican Party. He had nothing to do with it. But they always have Lincoln Day, or, the founder of the Republican Party. He had nothing to do with it. 2 years before he became a Republican, after it was founded. He even ran on the Whig Party after it was founded. So there's a lot of things in our history that we need to know and understand, and the background of what we're dealing with. In fact, well, I won't go any further than that. I'll just leave it at that. Sometimes Soros gets very candid. And when he was asked, and he's been asked this more than once, if he believed in God, and his answer was no. Now, it's pretty hard to believe in God when you think you're God. Because he said that that's what he thinks too. But he's come to terms with it. He said it used to bother me. But now I've come to terms with it because I'm making so many changes around the world, and I'm influencing so many different things, that now I'm at ease with being God, basically, is what he's answered. Incredible. What do you do with a guy like that? He says, I'm basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do. I don't feel guilty. And he answered that in regard to destroying the lives of people and their investments and putting companies out of business and all that sort of thing. Doesn't bother him at all. The important thing is that he became more wealthy in the process. That's all that he has a conscience about. That's his conscience. If he becomes more wealthy, then it's a good thing. If he doesn't become more wealthy, it's a bad thing. It has nothing to do with the people involved or anything else. Now, I apologize for quoting this gentleman, but he did say something that was very cogent. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He said, "Nothing happens in politics by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way." Now that's pretty simple, isn't it? Think about your own lives. Don't you just about plan everything that you do? I'm going to the store tomorrow, that's a plan. What are we going to buy at the store tomorrow? That's a plan. I'm going to send my kids to this school, that's a plan. I'm going to buy this dress or that suit, that's a plan. I'm going to do this tomorrow at work, that's a plan. You get together with other people at work and you're going to do this in your schedule or your invention or your marketing or whatever, that's a plan. Everything is planned out, except the accidents that happen in government. That we're supposed to be incompetence. They're all accidental. Don't pay any attention to any planning. Because if you believe that they've been planned, then you've got to ask yourself, well, who are the planners? And then you get to the nub of it. And so everything that they do on TV and in the media is to get you to not think that there's a plan behind these things. And if you start talking about the plan and the planners, pretty soon you're not on television anymore. And I don't mean even on Fox or Newsmax. There are certain things that are forbidden. If you bring them up, you're off the air. Anybody ever hear of Lou Dobbs? Who? He started to talk about these things. And the next thing you know, he's gone. And that's what happens. How many of you here understand or have ever heard of the Council on Foreign Relations? When have you ever heard that on TV? Ever talked about it? And yet they'll have people from the Council on Foreign Relations on Hannity and such, and never tell you their background. You know, there are a lot of people that Trump had that I just shook my head when he appointed them because they were part of the problem. Trump's problem is he's too trusting of people. He finds out later on, and then he comes down on them like a sledgehammer. But, you know, he, like Bolton. Bolton's one of the worst appointments he could have possibly made, and all of us knew it. But there you were. And so he obviously doesn't understand, hasn't read some of the information that's vital that he understands relative to who he works with and who he puts in there. But I will say one thing about it in regard to putting people in the cabinet. Let's say we all agree on an individual to become a particular secretary of such and such. Can we get that person approved by the Senate? Probably not. So you've got to compromise between somebody that you can get confirmed who will at least do something of what you want. Right? Because you're not going to get 100% constitutionalists approved by the Senate of the United States, ladies and gentlemen. It's not going to happen. Particularly when you've got a guy like Mitch McConnell in there. How many people know that Mitch McConnell is rich because of the Chinese?
He's married to
His wife, Chow, the Chow family. Chow, her father, started a shipping company, right? They build their ships in China. They man their ships with Chinese from China, and they ship goods from China to the United States. Before he started the shipping company, he was an official in the Chinese Communist Party. That's how much of a problem this thing is. And this guy, being enriched by this individual, is the leader of the Republicans in the Senate of the United States. And I'll tell you another whopper. There's a guy who's going to become the majority leader in the House. Sounds great, smiles great, handsome, says a lot of the right things, but do you listen to what he doesn't say? Because what he doesn't say is more important. And I will say this right now. I have seen that guy march in the streets with communists. Okay? Enough said. And called one of the most notorious communists to ever serve in the United States House of Representatives his friend. And yet he's the leader of the Republicans. We're in trouble. You could bet it was planned that way. The same way with Benedict. This is the cover of my book just before this book, called Benedict Biden. I found out on my trip into Maine last year that people under 30 didn't know what that title meant. I said, well, Benedict Arnold. Who? I had to explain to them who Benedict Arnold was. They'd never heard of him before. And by the way, I always give credit to my wife for this title. And I thought it was great. Now we're starting to see it being used more and more. But a lot of people don't have the information they need to have about our leaders. For instance, Biden was married to Jill in the United Nations Chapel, which refers to itself as the doorway to the UN, right across the street from the UN headquarters. And up on the altar they have the cross, Star of David, the crescent of Muslims, Shintoism, Buddhism, and all that. It is an ecumenical grouping of churches and religions, all supporting the United Nations. And many, many Christian churches have offices in that building. Maybe some of you even go to some of those churches and you don't know that they are so linked into the United Nations. And a lot of them send sermons out to the preachers so that what you get in the way of sermons comes straight from those folks. And you don't even know it. You think that they mull over these things in their study during the week, be brilliant. But at any rate, so he gets married in this United Nations chapel. And where does he go on his honeymoon? How many here know where Bernie Sanders went on his honeymoon? Yeah, behind the Iron Curtain, right? But he wasn't elected yet, was he? No. Biden spent his honeymoon behind the Iron Curtain, too. Incognito for a few weeks in communist Hungary. Nobody knows what he was doing there at the time. But he was already elected as a United States Senator at the height of the Cold War. Now that's something that no seated senator should have done under any circumstances, even if it was entirely innocent. But since I show in the book, since 1992, he has laid down the plan for what he has been doing as President of the United States. He's not taking orders from some shadow government outside of the Oval Office. These are things he has planned, and I can document it from since 1992 that he's planned. They're not mistakes or anything else. And how many have heard of his Build Back Better program? That is not his program. He's always been a plagiarist of United Nations programs. You can go to almost any website of the United Nations that's based on an activity of the United Nations, and you will find that there that is part of the Build Back Better program of the United Nations. All he's doing is following the UN program as President of the United States. That's what it is. And we're told that it's bumbling and fumbling, and obviously, he is, deteriorating physically and mentally. But he knows what he's doing from the standpoint of what the policies are and so on and so forth. And a lot of people can't believe these things. They can't believe that there must be something behind what's going on, that there are planners behind what's going on, because it's in secret and it's a conspiracy. And J. Edgar Hoover, back in the day when the FBI was still an honorable organization, he said this in Elks magazine back in October 1956. Yet the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent. You ever tried to talk to people about conspiracy, for those who believe in it? They just can't believe in it. They can't believe that there are people like that out there. See, I had the benefit of my youth, my misspent youth in Seattle, Washington. I slept on the floor of my parents' home for a year. We all did. Because the Union goons outside the house with their guns and spotlights, we were afraid that one of the evenings they were going to start plunking rounds into our house for almost a year. Well, they never did, but it was to intimidate us. But as a result of that that was between the Union leader and my father, and the Union was run by the mafia, the communists thought they could start a faction within the Union. So they sent us subscriptions to the communist newspapers. Thank you very much. And they would arrive in the mail, and my mother would give them to me. She says, "Don, take these out to the burn barrel and burn them right away. Don't read them." It took me a while to burn these papers, okay? So I knew in school a lot of what was going on. My teachers were very ignorant of what was going on. The whole world around me was ignorant, but the communists weren't hiding it in their own publications, okay? So I grew up knowing what was going on in the world of communism. And I was always a patriot. My dad raised me to be a patriot. By the time I was 11 years old, 10 years old actually, he had me read the biographies of all the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He had me read the Constitution and Declaration and understand them by that time. By the time I was 11, I read 1984 and understood what tyranny was really all about. Now, I don't recommend that someone that young read it because there's some passages in there that are not fit for little kids, okay? But, so I grew up a patriot. And sometimes I was very obnoxious about it. You know, the flag would go by in a parade, the guy didn't take his hat off, I'd knock it off for him. Okay, I was obnoxious, okay? But, so I grew up a real solid patriot. I didn't always understand my country and the foundations because I hadn't gotten it in school yet. I really didn't start understanding the foundational aspects of our country until I joined the John Birch Society. And I didn't understand how to solve the problems we were experiencing until I joined the John Birch Society. Because nobody else was talking about it. It's very different. At any rate, people have a hard time seeing the conspiracy. I grew up within the problems that they were producing. And oh, by the way, I'll tell you one little vignette. This was during the Korean War, and down on the waterfront of Seattle, they would post their, put little placards up, they like the old movie theaters, they put up a paper thing and then they brush it with glue. Well, the communists would do that all over the waterfront of Seattle. And we got to fire that MacArthur. He's a rotten guy. That was the posters. So Truman finally fires MacArthur, and the communists came along and put a placard over the old one and said, we got to get rid of Truman because he fired MacArthur. And I thought, boy, what a bunch of hypocrites. So I learned a lot about how they operate and that sort of thing in my youth. So what are we dealing with in the United States today? Are we dealing with corruption or conspiracy? Both. We're dealing with both. The conspiracy is using the corruption against us. Was it corruption or conspiracy that raided the Mar-a-Lago last year, earlier this year? Both. And they have yet to find anything that they found to be incriminating. Otherwise, he'd be indicted already. And they're going to do everything they can to prevent him from ever running again. Even this latest thing, by the way, where he says that we've got to suspend the Constitution and all that stuff, that if you really read what he said, and if you read other aspects of where he's trying to explain more of what he meant, you realize that he had no idea of suspending the Constitution, period. But that's not what the media wanted you to think, okay? So what we're dealing with is a pincers movement. And it's pressure from above and pressure from below. And Soros finances the pressure from below as well as the pressure from above. You see, because what's happening in the streets is you have all these Marxist organizations causing a problem. And they riot and they do all sorts of different things. And they push up. But then you've got the local governments, the state governments, that push down on the citizens, not the people in the streets, because they don't stop the people in the streets. The governments are not respecting private property rights any more than the Marxists in the streets respect private property rights, or they'd stop the rioting a long time ago when it breaks out. We used to be able to stop riots in this country literally overnight. Now they let them go on for weeks, burning, killing, and so on and so forth, because the local authorities do nothing. Why? Because the mayors do nothing. The city attorneys have been elected by Soros. The county attorneys have been elected by Soros. The state attorneys have been elected by Soros. So while we're concentrating up here on Congress, they're eroding our governments from out from underneath of us through the Soros monies. And while we all looked at what happened in the last election as a Democrat and Republican, how many know that the city attorneys and county attorneys and so on and so forth, more of them were elected by Soros, just adding on to the ones they already had. Nobody even gets it in the newspaper. You haven't even heard about it. So that's what's going on with this Soros problem. And so people have to pay more attention to their local politics. Don't get all that excited about the national ones. You got to take a lot more attention at the local ones, because in our system of government, power goes up. It's starting to come down, which is wrong. Power is supposed to go up. And when they start to take over that local power out of the hands of the local citizens, then we're in trouble. So you've got to pay more attention to that. And so the people are caught in between. I was talking the other day to a black fellow. He's a nurse. And he was from California. He says, I moved to California, and I thought, well, I'll move to Minneapolis. The pot into the fire. And he said, I worked in the hospital there, and he says, my wife and my little boy and I were driving down the street, and there was a dead body in the street. So that bothered him, particularly because his son saw it, which he'll never get that image out of his head for the rest of his life. So a couple of weeks later, he was driving down the street again, different street, and saw another dead body in the street in Minneapolis. And he decided, well, I better get out of here. And he said, it was not a problem. leaving his hospital. And the reason it wasn't a problem for him leaving the hospital is he just got fired because he wouldn't take the jab. So, you know, he, a man of conscience, felt that he wouldn't want that vaccine. Oh, by the way, my grandson is a microbiologist who works in a laboratory that works with Pfizer. Okay? He will not allow his kids or himself or his wife to be vaccinated. Did I tell you something? And this is 3 years now. And the interesting thing is that that company does not make it mandatory that those microbiologists get vaccinated. Everybody else, yes, but not. That says a lot, doesn't it? So anyway, I don't know if I was the first one, but I was close to the first one, if not the first one, that documented that this whole thing with the pandemic had been planned for 12 years. And I just would like to see some people go to jail over it, frankly. So the pressure from below comes from outfits like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, other communist organizations. Antifa is actually, they use the same emblems and slogans and so forth. Where Antifa was born, it was organized by Leon Trotsky, who was just right under Stalin until he had to leave Germany and Russia, and went to Mexico because he and Stalin got into it. Megalomaniacs all want to be leaders. So if they're not made leader, they want to kill the guy that wants to take their spot, or vice versa. That's how the mafia works too, isn't it? How do you get to be the mafia boss? You wait till the number one guy goes and has a shave at the local barbershop. And so that's the way it works with these megalomaniacs. I mean, you've got to get rid of your rivals. Saddam Hussein did it in 1 week. The Ba'ath Party, he organized all the leaders of the Ba'ath Party to come in to this conference, and he says, you will go out and shoot this guy, and you will go out and shoot that guy, and so on and so forth. And the guys that were instructed to do these things knew they had to do it, or both of them were going to get killed anyway. So megalomaniacs don't like competition, okay? So at any rate, Antifa is nothing more than the street gangs of the communists against the brown shirts in Nazi Germany, okay? So Antifa lost. The brown shirts, there were too many of them, they beat up Antifa and they dissolved. What happened to all those Antifa members? Most of them became members of the brown shirts, because there wasn't that much difference between them other than their emblems and the flags and their leader. If you take a look at what Antifa stood for, or what the Nazi Party stood for, they're basically the same. It's just one like Stalin and the other one like Hitler. But otherwise, it was the same program, so they were very comfortable. And the Germans had a saying about it, and it was widely known saying. They called these people beefsteak Nazis. Brown on the outside and red on the inside. So Antifa is nothing more than what was started in Germany by Trotsky, okay? And it's working the streets of the United States today. And it is, if you look it up in Wikipedia, you'll discover that it is a decentralized organization. Now that does not compute. If it's an organization, it has to be centralized. It's just that simple. It is a centralized organization. They just don't want you to know who's behind it all. That's the problem. These are just a bunch of people from city to city to city to city that just happen to adopt the same flag and the same uniform and everything else literally on the same day. Don't worry. There was an interesting article in Time magazine. I don't know if any of you saw it, February 15th, 2021. But most people didn't see it. You know, they picked up Time magazine, but It was an article that said that there was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes. Now, when they use the word conspiracy, it's okay. When we use the word conspiracy, that's mythology. But it's page after page of all this single little tiny type that nobody read. But it was written by them. And they confess that they, and show you how they manipulated the 2020 election. But the media outside of this never talk about it. So you can go online and read this article. It's very revealing. That's why the participants want the secret history of the 2020 election told. A well-funded cabal conspiracy of powerful people working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. Now, some of that's coming out courtesy of Musk, right? The article goes on to elaborate who coordinated the control as well as who financed it. Much of it was financed by SOROS and the coterie that he's involved in. And the interesting thing is that COVID money was also used to change the election administration. Where did all those billions of COVID money go? Nobody seems to know. Nobody seems to care. Not even the Republican Party seems to care. How do you disappear, in quotes, billions of dollars of money and not have a clue where it went? They know where it went. They just don't want to admit it. So we see that Soros money is involved in the various open society foundations. There's more than one. But they're changing society to parallel the Marxist agenda and the election of those who promote the Marxist agenda. And they elect city and state attorneys, even sheriffs, secretaries of state. Why secretaries of state? Because in most states they certify the elections. Remember Sheriff Opile down along the Arizona border? Soros put $1 million into the candidacy of his opponent to get rid of that guy because he was telling the truth about a lot of things. So he's yet, though, only one guy, okay? He's just one man. It's a large number of organizations that work towards Marxism. One of them is the Council on Foreign Relations, which was founded right after the meeting in France to adopt the peace treaty with Germany. The United States did not agree to the peace treaty with Germany. Most people think of it in terms of we didn't become a member of the League of Nations. But the League of Nations was part of the peace treaty with Germany. And so we did not settle with Germany until a few years even after that. And so the Council on Foreign Relations was formed to convince the American people to become part of a one world government. That's their mission, okay? And people that are members of that believe in that concept, even if they are not evil. They may believe in it innocently. Stupid, but innocent. Because power tends to corrupt, does it not? And there's no exceptions. And if you have a one world government without a contravening force, it's going to be corrupt. That's simple. The Chinese have an awful lot of influence in the United States in the elections, even into organizations, not just on the internet. They helped bring about a Republican Virginia to being a Democrat Virginia until the terrorists in Virginia brought it back into the Republican sphere. You know the terrorists in Virginia, those are the women that were in front of the boards, the school boards. So anyway, rushing through to the end, there's a lot of Chinese influence and money in the politicians. I outline it in all of society in my book on China. I recommend Peter Schweitzer's book on Red-Handed. That gets more into the politicians who are taking money, like Pelosi, like Mitch McConnell, George Bush, both of them. Jeb Bush, much of the money he ran for president with was Chinese money. I should take that picture off there because Biden didn't take money from the Chinese. He actually took money from his son, right? So the primary goals are one world and no God. We can elaborate on that, but I'll just finish up here real quick. Immigration. Immigration, most of you know, is a problem, but one of the key ingredients that's not getting out regarding immigration is how many organized Chinese have been coming across the border for years. They have way stations along the border where you can get a telephone and water if you're lost, and the signs are English, Spanish, and Chinese. They want control of the local police federally as a stepping stone towards an international control through the UN. They want to alter the Constitution, and they want to use the environment to control every aspect of your life. What we need is election integrity, where we use paper, no machines, hand counted, one day, ID, and you know, that's the way it was when I was a kid, and we knew by 10 o'clock who won. Now that we've got all these machines taking care of it for us, it takes months. The solution, we can quote Thomas Jefferson, "In the questions of power then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution." Now there's a caveat. The people doing the binding must know the Constitution and be organized. Okay? And of course, I always recommend the John Birch Society. If you take a close look at it, you'll see we're organized completely different than anybody else. We are a true organization, right down to the neighborhoods. And we have a national concerted action program, and we take the long view. We don't do the issue du jour, although once in a while we get involved. We take along, they need a one world government. So we've got, and that will be embodied in the UN, so we have a get us out of the UN program. They want to federalize the police, so we have a support your local police program. No other organization has a get us out of the UN program. No other organization has a support your local police program without federal aid, because what the federal government will finance, it will control. So if you let them help you hire people, if you help them equip your people, they will ultimately control your police. It's that simple. And the city council can find a way of financing their local police by cutting out all this other crap they're trying to do. And take the money from those things and put it into where it's needed to keep crime down and protect the citizens. Okay? So they have, and I'll close with this, to say that we have basically false alternatives that are once for the left and once for the right. And the one with the police is the most obvious. With the left, it's defund the police, get rid of the police, have federal police, and then evolve into the UN. That's their program. But for the right, they have, we need to have more police to help the crime situation and everything else. We'll go to the federal government and help them finance the hiring, the training, and so on and so forth. And that is the long route to the same thing that the left wants. And a lot of people don't understand that. You don't need national reform of the police. Why do we need to reform the police to begin with? They're good enough. If you have a, well, I keep going on and on. If you have a problem in your local police department, most people don't know there are 11 places locally that you can take that grievance. Most people don't know that. And it involves all these people that SOROS is financing, including the city attorneys and so on and so forth. So, at any rate, that's a very abbreviated presentation on the SOROS problem. And I hope you've learned something in the process. And thank you very much.
So, I have a loud enough voice.
Oh,
you want to go bathroom?
I want to talk confidentially. You got to listen to everything. Hey, would you get out of there?
Everybody give Art one more round of applause. Honestly, he's a national treasure. You see, traveled the world, traveled the country doing all this research. I do have some membership forms. If anybody's interested in the John Birch Society, please come let me know. We will be having an intimate breakfast tomorrow morning at the Oberlin Cafe over the Stockyards. You're more than welcome to join us. If you want to come out there and have a private, more intimate conversation with Art. And also, I'll be having his books. I ordered a bunch of them. I was hoping they'd get here today, but they did not. So, but I will be having his books here at the next couple meetings. I do have some with me tonight. China, Benedict Biden, the Second Amendment, and it's the world of Soros. So I'll have these books for sale also at the next few meetings. So if you would like a signed copy, John Selk here has agreed to make that a possibility for you. By the way, for those of you guys that heard me tell the story of how I got involved with the John Birch Society, real quick, they called me a couple of different times to become come onto the paid staff, and I turned them down a couple of times because I was too busy to take the job. But it was this man right here, this 80-year-old man here in the suit, who convinced me that if I didn't take this position and try to save our country now, then in 4 years there would be a country left to save. So if you get a chance, say hi to John also. He was with the Birch Society. He traveled the country with Robert Welch, the founder, and he's been with us a long time. So thank you again for John Selk, and thanks you guys for having us. And Russell Waymeyer's coming up next, right?
What time is breakfast? Yeah.